Humanity's history is rich with countless fascinating details. However, there are a variety of events that you weren't taught about in addition to the important dates and people you heard about in your history lesson. So pay attention as we share 15 historical truths you didn't know. Number 1. Forks used to be considered a sacrilege. Do you know that the forks you frequently use at meals were originally thought to be sacrilegious? Using them represented a serious transgression. Since God had already given us our fingers as natural forks, the introduction of forks in the 11th century in Italy was seen as sacrilegious because they were viewed as artificial hands. Although forks had existed for a while, it wasn't until the Middle Ages that they were utilized as a common kitchen tool. When a Byzantine princess shocked the court by bringing forks to her new husband's Venetian home in the 11th century, the usage of forks was condemned as blasphemous. At a time when most Europeans still used their fingers and knives to eat, she brought a golden fork, which the local clergy used instead of the plastic ones they had been using. Forks weren't widely used in England until the early 18th century. At first, only 2 prongs were used. It took another 100 years for the 3rd and 4th prongs to be added. Over time, forks evolved into more of a societal issue. While some communities accepted their use, others mocked those who did. Number 2. Germantown, Nordlingen is built inside a 14-million-year-old meteor crater. The town of Nordlingen, which has a population of 20,000 and is situated entirely inside the enormous meteorite crater known as the Nordlinger Ries in Bavaria, Germany, is unlike any other town on the entire Earth. A mile-wide meteor that struck Earth approximately 14.5 million years ago created the crater. For many years, it was believed that the shallow depression in the middle of which the town is located was a volcanic crater. However, in 1960, 2 American scientists, Eugene Shoemaker and Edward Chow, were able to demonstrate that the depression was the result of a meteorite impact. This was the first time that evidence that revealed the true origin of this town came to light. According to reports, Shoemaker had scratched the church's walls to examine what material they were composed of when he discovered shocked quartz, a type of rock that is only created by the shock forces often associated with meteorite impact. It was discovered via further exploration of the rock formations that the crater was not created by a volcano, but rather by a meteor impact. Number 3. Numerous imposters claimed they were Marie Antoinette's deceased son. 8-year-old Louis Charles was brought to prison after the French Revolution and was never again seen in public. What happened to him is now a mystery. Louis Charles de France grew up as the charming son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. After his brother died, Charles was named the heir to the French monarchy at the age of 4. Since then, he had been expected to succeed as King Louis de Castille, but the French Revolution ruined his family with the killing of his parents in 1793, and he was imprisoned in a cell in the Paris Temple, Louis. Charles, who had been neglected and undernourished in his cell, passed away from tuberculosis on June 8, 1795, when he was just 10 years old. 2. Prevent suspicion, the young boy was buried in secret. A few years later, dozens of men who claimed to be the son would come forward. Of the nearly 100 imposters, Charles Guillaume Nandorf was the most well-known. There were a variety of practical reasons why the pretenders might stake a claim. If successful, the claimant may ultimately find himself seated on the French throne. Riches, fame, and adoration were received by many of the imposters, which inspired more to come forward. Number 4. The Titanic's owners never said the ship was unsinkable. If you watched James Cameron's classic movie from 1997, you might have thought that the Titanic's owners had genuinely ruled out the idea of the ship sinking, but that is untrue. Before the ship sank, some trade publications had claimed that it was almost unsinkable. In fact, many survivors said that they had chosen to join the maiden voyage because they had believed the ship was unsinkable. The constructor Harland and Wolff did not assert that the vessel was unsinkable. Rather, this was an advertising claim made by the White Star Line, which emphasized the safety of the Olympics and Titanic. There was a rising conviction that science held the solution to all of humanity's problems, but the sinking of the Titanic caused people to lose faith in science. In its claims, it stated that as far as it is feasible to do so, these two great warships are built to be unsinkable. Number 5. India has not invaded any country in the last 10,000 years. India's Defense Minister, Rajnath Singh, said in early 2022 that his country had never invaded or attempted to conquer another nation in its lengthy history. However, India is one of the nations that has been invaded the most in the globe. Then why did the country decide against advancing into other countries? Let's take a little historical tour of India's United Nations existence, which began in 1947. The Indian subcontinent was only largely administered as a single entity under the reigns of the Marathas, Rajputs, Mughals, and Mauryas at a time when numerous autonomous factions frequently engaged in conflict with one another. The Greek, Mongol, and Persian empires made multiple failed efforts to conquer ancient India. Most countries attack other countries out of necessity or greed. Fortunately, India has always had ample resources for exploitation and has long served as a significant hub for international trade, making attempts to invade other sovereign nations pointless. Despite sending emissaries to promote Hinduism and Buddhism, the initiatives were nonviolent. Number 6. Johnny Appleseed was actually real. Because there is so much American folklore, it can be challenging to tell which stories are made up and which ones are true. We are actually looking at a real person when it comes to Johnny Appleseed, the folklore figure who is claimed to have traversed the country on foot while sowing apple trees. Although some aspects of his life have become mythologized through time, John Chapman, better known as Johnny Appleseed, was a native of Leominster, Massachusetts. Around 1798 in Pennsylvania's Allegheny Valley, he established his first orchards of apple trees. From there, he spread out throughout the globe, planting orchards wherever he went. He would travel many miles each day and spend the night outside while doing so. In truth, a street was named after him even though the city planners preferred his mythical moniker since that is how he got his nickname. He frequently carried a bag of apple seeds. Number 7. The first face on the dollar. When you hear the name George Washington, the first thing that probably comes to mind is the image of the first president that appears on the $1 paper dollar. However, one bill was not George Washington. The U.S. government had to produce new currencies during the Civil War in addition to the large amounts of paper money already in use. Perhaps you could have tried to ponder how he came up on the note. In order to finance its war effort, the nation issued its first legal tender in 1862, including the official $1 bill, whose early design featured Salmon Chase, the nation's first chief banknote designer and secretary of the Treasury at the time. When the United States Bureau of Engraving and Printing took over the creation of U.S. currency, the money printed at first had no backing and was known as greenbacks. In 1869, George Washington's likeness first appeared on the $1 bill. The $1 bill has not undergone a redesign since it was created in 1963, and there are no plans to do so anytime soon. Number 8. President Zachary Taylor died from a cherry overdose. There was no established cause of President Zachary Taylor's death when he passed away on July 9, 1850, after a brief illness and after serving for 16 months. You'd be shocked by the many sources' varying discoveries on the precise cause of his death. One of them was that Taylor went to a 4th of July festival and drank a lot of iced milk and cherries. He then went back to the White House and drank a lot of water that was contaminated with cholera-causing bacteria. Another source claimed that Taylor might have passed away from gastroenteritis brought on by a combination of fresh milk and highly acidic cherries. Other witnesses thought Taylor might have died from food poisoning or typhoid fever. Taylor's medical professionals determined that cholera morbus, a word originally used to denote gastroenteritis inflammation of the small intestine brought on by bacteria, a virus, or a parasite, was the cause of his demise. Number 9. The Greeks believed beans contain the souls of the dead. You may remember the Greek mathematician and philosopher Pythagoras from geometry class. He also founded his own cult. Pythagoreans, who followed Pythagoras, lived communally, studied the cosmos, and were vegetarians, but they did not eat beans like modern vegetarians do. They simply avoided eating broad beans, also known as fava beans, because they saw them as a magical emblem of death. Pythagoras' assertion that eating beans amounted to cannibalism garnered a lot of attention from ancient writers. Pythagoreans thought that because kava beans resembled flesh, they might hold the souls of the dead. Because of their hollow stems and black-spotted blossoms, some believers believed that these plants connected Earth and Hades and acted as rungs for human souls. According to legend, Pythagoras spent some time living in a cave while evading a dictator. He was escaping attackers who chased and caught up with him when a field of flowering fava beans blocked his path and he was unable to travel any farther. This is what ultimately led to his death. Number 10. There were female gladiators in ancient Rome. Although there is scant documentation of female gladiators competing in the harsh sport throughout the Roman Empire in art legislation and written chronicles, ladies of all classes, including the elite, engaged in violent, weapon-based combat against one another for entertainment purposes, though not nearly to the same extent as males did. Only the wealthy ladies, however, could afford instruction and had the time to exercise. The emperors Nero, Titus, and Domitian held these contests in the booming city of Pompeii in the 1st century BC. These battles were particularly against monsters, dwarfs, and other ladies in spectacles. Number 11. The Persians once used cats as shields in the Battle of Pelusium. You may have read how cats contributed to the ancient Egyptians' defeat in the Pelusium War. The ancient Egyptians once held cats in such high regard that they refused to kill them, even if it meant risking their lives. They thought cats represented the goddess Bast, a deity of the home, fertility, and women's secrets. Ancient Egyptians' love for cats became so apparent during the Persian invasion of Egypt that Camphus II, the monarch of Persia from 529 to 522 BC, was aware of how much the Egyptians valued their felines. As a result, the Persians gathered as many cats as they could, and during the war, they placed cats, dogs, and lambs in front of their soldiers. The Persians painted a picture of cats on their shields in addition to worshipping cats, dogs, and lambs in ancient Egypt. Because they were afraid of the goddess Bastet's anger, the ancient Egyptians refrained from killing the cats. As a result, they lost the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BC and came under the power of the Persians. Number 12. Albert Einstein was once offered the presidency of Israel. Not everyone is aware that famed Jewish scientist Albert Einstein also had the chance to shine in politics, despite the fact that many people are familiar with him for his contributions to theoretical physics. The Israeli government at the time, led by Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, offered Einstein the position of president after the passing of Chaim Weizmann, Israel's first president, in 1952. The function, according to history, was more of an honor than a position of power and responsibility. The decision to recognize him was made since Einstein constantly supported the state of Israel throughout his life. You'd think he'd be happy to accept the offer. Sadly, Einstein rejected the offer without delay due to his advanced age and lack of relevant expertise. Number 13. Alexander the Great was accidentally buried alive. At the age of 25, Alexander the Great founded what might be referred to as the largest empire of the ancient world. His army defeated the Persian provinces of Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt without suffering a single loss. Sadly, he passed away unexpectedly in Babylon at the age of 32. His death's cause has baffled historians for decades. Some have suggested typhoid, others alcoholism, still others poison, but there may be an answer at last. The military prodigy had Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurological condition that rendered him immobile for 6 days and rendered him unable to move, speak, or breathe. Alexander's men may have been preparing his body for burial while he was still alive in 323 BC. According to Dr. Catherine Hall of the Dunedin School of Medicine in New Zealand, Alexander actually passed away 6 days after it was traditionally believed. Number 14. Smoking in public was prohibited for women. In New York City, the Sullivan Ordinance, which made it unlawful for women to smoke in public, was approved on January 21, 1908. Many ladies didn't take the rule seriously until Mayor George McClellan vetoed it 2 weeks later, but instead of punishing the woman who engaged in the act, the edict held the proprietors of the businesses where any woman is seen smoking accountable. Despite there being no specific steps taken against her, it was claimed that one woman, Katie Mulcahy, was the only one to ever violate the rule. She was ordered to pay a $5 fine but was arrested when she objected to doing so. The ordinance's justification was weak, but it's odd to think that back then, a lady who smoked a cigarette was viewed as dangerously immoral and unreliable. However, males were allowed to smoke whenever and wherever they pleased, thus the government's attempt to restrict smoking to women speaks a lot about how society views women. Number 15. France built a fake Paris to fool German bombers during World War I. By creating a false Paris, the French government attempted to deceive the Germans during World War I. The false Paris town, which included reproductions of iconic landmarks, was created kilometers away from the actual Paris out of fear of a potential overnight aircraft attack. 1917, a few years after the Germans first bombarded Paris in 1914, saw the conception of the notion. According to Bloomberg, during the actual assaults, the lights in Paris were turned off at night. However, in the created fake Paris, the lights were kept dim to give the impression that people were attempting to avoid detection but were failing. There are many fascinating events in history, and it's always intriguing to see what you'll discover if you truly look back in time. Thanks for watching, and tell us what fact surprised you the most in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.